about something called as the branchial arches. Okay. Now, when you talk about the branchial arches, the only thing that I can understand, and particularly if you have seen a fish, and if you have removed the operculum, you will get to see that there are multiple arches that are happening again in a fish like this. And if you see an embryo which is around 4 to 6 weeks, and this is the embryo which is smiling at you, and if you see their neck, again it somewhat resembles that of the fish that I have tried to draw. So effectively what happens is that there is an ectoderm and there is an endoderm, and that means in technical word we call them as a pharyngeal pouch. We call them as a pharyngeal pouch. And when you call them as a pharyngeal pouch, then what happens is that there are pockets of ectoderm, and I will take another ink with me, and then there are packets about something called as an endoderm. So that means endoderm will contain some packet, and ectoderm will again contain some packet or pocket, whatever you like to call them to be. Now, what is in between them, these packets of ectoderm and endoderm, I'll take the again an ink color, is something called as a mesoderm. So what I have done is that the green color is the mesoderm, the blue color will be the endoderm, and the black color will be the ectoderm. So if you can remember by this model that ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm, then let us go to a little more to make you understand that when you talk about the mesoderm, then this mesoderm is known to contain, technically all of them are known to contain a cartilage. Okay, they are known to contain a cranial nerve, and they are known to contain a arterial pedicle or an arterial supply, and they are also known to contain some amount of myoblast. Okay, so these are things that every of these arches are thus important. Coming back to the fish, in a fish there are 6 arches. The important thing is that when it comes to a human being, there are 4. What is important is that the first, the second, the third, the fourth are present. The fifth usually fails to develop and gets joined with 2, and the sixth in a human being is technically called rudimentary. So this is usually the story that happens in this one. Now, what is important is that when you talk about the first arch, so that means in your textbooks of anatomy that you have read, so let us make it a picture about first, let us make it a picture about second, the third, and the fourth. As I've said, fifth is very minimal, and sixth is rudimentary. So, but still I have made these ones. Now, when you talk about the first ones, okay, the first 2 arches, please remember their cartilages are named. So if you talk about the first arches, the cartilage is technically called as a Meckel's cartilage, whereas the second arch contains something called as the hyoid arch, and it is called as Reichardt's cartilage. Okay, so this is something that you have just remembered from your anatomy days, right? And now from the first arch and the second arch, what are the things that grow by? Now, when you talk about the first arch, or the technically the Meckel's cartilage, then Meckel's cartilage, etc., they ossify to make the 3 bones of the ear, the malleus, the incus, not the stapes. On the other hand, they make a part of the lingula of the mandible, which is something that you have to remember. You are saying, oh my God, I have to remember this from embryology books. Yes, you have. And then there is something called as the sphenomandibular ligament. The sphenomandibular ligament. Now, if we talk about the second arch then forms something called as the stapes, the styloid process, the stylohyoid ligament, and it is known to make the lesser cornu and the part of the body of the hyoid. The third arch forms something called as the greater cornu and the body of the hyoid. The fourth arch is responsible for the laryngeal cartilages. So these are the basic things that we always have to remember. Now each arch, definitely I'll take another ink with me now. Each arch, as I've said, is supplied by a nerve. And remember, the first arch is supplied by the mandibular nerve. Okay, so that means in the first arch, what comes out is something called as the muscles of mastication. So that means all the muscles of mastication which are derived from the mandible thing are supplied by the mandibular nerve. The second arch, however, is supplied by the facial nerve. Okay, so this is a muscle in this one is the muscles of the facial expression. So this is something that we have to remember. Okay, also with this, as it is a facial nerve, it is also known to supply a muscle that is called as stylohyoid, and it is known to supply the stapedius. Now the stylohyoid is not exactly supplied by the facial, but the stapedius is. It is also known to originate the posterior belly of the digastric. Right. Now, the third arch gives rise to the stylopharyngeus muscle. The stylopharyngeus muscle. And when you talk about the stylopharyngeus, there is an arch that is a nerve called as the glossopharyngeal. So the nerve of the third arch is glossopharyngeal. The nerve of the fourth arch is the vagus, and you get the pharyngeal and the laryngeal muscles. So laryngeal cartilages, and you get the vagus as their nerve. Okay. So to begin with, this is just the primer. Okay. But what is important is that out of these, if you now want to little bit of more detailed discussions, then remember that for a surgeon, what are the other important things that we should remember? Remember that from the first arch comes something called as a pharyngotympanic tube. Now, somewhat of an importance to a surgeon maybe. Number two, from the second arch comes the tonsil, which is very important thing to remember. Third arch, we have to remember the thymus and the inferior parathyroid. So this is important for us to remember. Okay. The fourth arch, we get the superior parathyroid. So we have to remember this part. And from the fourth arch, there are also something which called as C cells of the thyroid or the ultimobranchial body. Okay, so this is the basic thing that we have to remember in the branchial arches. We can go on and on about talking about branchial arches, but for a surgeon, please remember that these are the basic things. So each of them have an ectoderm, an endoderm, and a mesoderm. Mesoderm contains the cartilage, a cranial nerve, and pedicle, and a myoblast, and each of them they have about these points to remember. And then you have a first arch as pharyngotympanic tube, the tonsil, the thymus, and the superior parathyroid. So this is all about the things that we have to know about the branchial arch. Okay, now